Time now for Talking Campus, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix Associate Editor Greg Piper. Greg, we have an epidemic, it seems now, of universities and university officials seemingly comfortable with the idea that we're going to ban men. We're going to ban men from all sorts of access to rooms, to buildings, to gymnasiums, to swimming pools. Could you talk a little bit about what makes university administrators think they have the right to ban anybody from anything?
It really goes down to trying to create a safe place or a safe space for certain people whom they consider marginalized. We've mostly seen this with regard to women who feel uncomfortable with the presence of men around, to the idea that someone's going to flirt with them, or they're just going to be kind of intimidated by the presence of someone with testosterone or who behaves in a kind of stereotypically manly way. And they've raised this issue before. They've said we're uncomfortable being here if men are going to be here. Can we have some set aside hours maybe, or can we have an entire space to ourselves so that we feel comfortable studying or socializing or doing anything else of this nature? Perhaps even having lunch. We're afraid of eating in the presence of men. And you don't see schools really pushing too hard to say, no, you can spend time with the opposite sex. Without being endangered. They seem really reluctant to challenge women and say it's not valid that you feel unsafe in this situation, that you feel like you can't be yourself in the presence of men, that it's actually going to distract you. The schools are probably worried that women are going to say that it creates a discriminatory environment, that it prevents them from pursuing an education. This is language out of Title IX. That can be thrown back at schools. They have already kind of given a lot of leeway to interpretation there in not saying, no, this has a specific meaning as opposed to the subjective meaning that you're putting on it.
So, Greg, is it my twisted imagination? I remember just 10 years ago, there was basically a campus war, a feminist war against male spaces, right? The idea that you could have male-only colleges or fraternities. This is verboten. Yeah. And now, within 10 years, we're at the point where women must be segregated. In fact, and by the logic you just laid out, and I think that was a really well-articulated argument for what's happening here. By that logic, though, why can't women demand spaces absolutely free for men? Only female teachers, only female classrooms. They only deal with female administrators. The people who serve them lunch can only be women. I mean, why is that not a realistic place that we're going based on where we've been so far?
It could be entirely realistic. I think from the perspective of schools, they see these requests from women as being fairly minor, something that not really men are going to protest against, such as a lounge, a lunchroom, a study area, or even workout spaces in a gym. It's just not seen as something that's really going to draw a lot of negative attention that people are going to fight back against. I think they're relying on the goodwill of society, which has historically seen women as needing some spaces of their own, as needing protection from men, because men can threaten them, can be scary. It's kind of a weird time. We're returning to a sort of secular Puritanism, I would call it, where we have this kind of this general notion that women and men are equal, but women are still need protection. It's kind of a one-way civil right in this sense.
Sounds awfully paternalistic to me. I remember a time when people would make the argument, well, why are you complaining if African Americans sit in the back of the bus? They're still getting a ride, right? So it seems to be there's a lot of parallelism here. Talk about some of the examples in your own research and reporting. I know we got a couple of incidences in Michigan. We talked about Stanford. Talk about what was happening in Michigan with this banning men idea.
Sure. There are a couple of public universities in Michigan where this has happened. We know about this primarily because of a professor at the University of Michigan Flint campus named Mark Perry. He's kind of tried to make this his own personal crusade to highlight this unequal treatment and this favoritism normally toward women. This happened at Michigan State with a women's only lounge that had existed going back to the Great Depression. No one had seemingly challenged this before, or at least made a formal complaint against it. And he started actually blogging about this a few years ago and saying this seems to patently violate both the state constitution and perhaps the university's own non-discrimination rules. And so it kind of took one person really ragging on the university, not even his own university, but simply raising the issue and saying this seems to fly in the face of established law and probably your own procedures. And when the school eventually got rid of this women-only lounge, they portrayed it as being something that was already in the works before he was complaining about it. It seemed a little bit of a stretch to say that nobody had known this. This was actually in the works. That they were talking to their lawyers about this, and we're planning on making this open to everyone. So it really seems like when you shine a spotlight on this, you start to get universities to act much more quickly than they are allegedly doing already. This also happened at his own university in Flint. There was a series of faculty awards that were only available to women or seemingly racial minorities. He challenged this and said this seems to be a pretty obvious violation of civil rights. And he got the lawyers basically to say, yeah, we should probably look at this and open it up. And so they did that again very quickly because someone was shining a light on it. You really don't see universities do this kind of thing unless someone specifically publicly calls them out on it. And they'll respond pretty quickly in that sense and just kind of forget what happened. But they will always justify it on the sense that this is needed to make people feel safe, to recognize the work of people who may not otherwise be recognized. In the case of the faculty awards, they can always come up with a justification, but you really just have to challenge them in public and they'll start equivocating.
Well, and more seriously, Greg, this is institutional discrimination. What is really missed, a lot of people missed the boat on this. This isn't just social engineering gone awry. This isn't just good-natured attempts to rectify discrimination in the past. This is an institutional type of discrimination. You've got lawyers, you've got faculty, you've got administrators, you've got students who are planning, plotting, and implementing things that are obviously discriminatory, and that when you call them on them, they admit, oh yeah, well maybe we didn't think this through. But this isn't. We keep hearing from the academic left that all of these changes have to be made because of institutional discrimination. And what this reveals is that what they're doing is they're either replacing academic institutional discrimination with institutional discrimination, or they're inventing policies out of whole cloth to discriminate specifically against certain people. How in the world? Title IX. All right, Title IX, many of these campuses will argue Title IX is the reason why we're justified in doing this. How is it that some faculty and administrators can make the argument that a law that is used to ban discrimination can be used to enforce it as well? How do the liberals, the progressives on campus, square that circle?
The simple answer is they say it's not discrimination. There's this kind of idea that if you are a person who comes from what you might call a privileged class, whether you're male or white or cisgender, you identify with your birth sex, that anything that's done against you is not really discrimination. It's simply remedying past discrimination. It's one way. And so you could plausibly say this creates an unsafe campus environment for me. If you allow men to be with me while I'm eating or while I'm trying to study, you need to create kind of an alternative space here. Some of the language they're using here is actually reminiscent of how schools have approached specifically Muslim students, Muslim women in particular, with treating them the kind of the same way that they might treat other religious groups and other facets of life, saying that you have freedom of conscience here. We want to make an accommodation for you. That's a little more recognized in the law than a lot of what's happening based purely on creating separate facilities segregated by sex. There's also some language in Title IX and some regulations that specify that you can have separate, let's say, changing facilities or restrooms, places where you're going to partially disrobe, where you're going to be kind of in an intimate setting, and that's specifically laid out in the regulations. There's nothing subjective about that, but you take that exception there, and you pretty much extrapolate it out to any situation, regardless of how public it is, regardless that you're fully clothed and you're doing something like you do in any normal public space. So a lot of this stuff, when it goes to court, it's going to be struck down, but it's rarely going to get there because schools are going to realize we can't win this in court. We've been doing this for a while, but it's only because we haven't been challenged on it formally.
That's an interesting codicil, right? That maybe there is, under law, a religious exemption. Although it's interesting how you square the circle again of private lunchrooms for women who wear hijabs, and the fact that so many campuses have been going after Bible study groups on campus, or kids who want to read Bible studies in their dorm rooms are being forbidden for doing it. Christian groups are being forced off campus. Again, it's kind of a institutionally discriminatory refusal to apply the laws equally, however they interpret them. But be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix editors by joining us on all of our social media platforms.